In this video, I use modern AI technology to recreate what daily life looked like in Thebes, Egypt, around 1300 BC, during one of the most prosperous eras in human history. These scenes are AI-generated interpretations, carefully researched to reflect how the wealthy elite of ancient Egypt may have actually lived. This is not real footage. This is historical imagination, built on archaeological evidence. Let me show you what a single day looked like at the top of one of the most powerful civilizations the world has ever known. Before the sun had cleared the eastern horizon, the household was already moving. In the great estates along the Nile, mornings began not with silence, but with purpose. Servants moved through painted corridors. Water was drawn. Fires were lit in outdoor kitchens. The air carried the scent of charcoal, bread dough, and the faint mineral coolness of the river not far beyond the walls. A wealthy official in Thebes, a vizier, a high priest, a military commander, lived in a compound that historians describe as almost self-contained. Archaeological evidence from New Kingdom sites suggests these villas could span several acres. They included gardens, granaries, servant quarters, and livestock pens, all organized around a central multi-story home built of whitewashed mud brick that reflected the sharp morning light. The rooms inside were decorated with remarkable care. Wall paintings in vivid blue, red, and green depicted hunting scenes, feasting, and the gods. The floors were sometimes covered in painted tiles. Wooden furniture, rare and expensive in a land with few forests, included carved beds, chests inlaid with ivory, and chairs with lion claw feet. The wealthy Egyptian woke to comfort that most of the ancient world could not imagine. A personal attendant waited nearby. Water scented with lotus blossoms was ready for washing. The morning routine had already been prepared, every detail tended to before the master had opened their eyes. Evidence suggests this was not seen as indulgence. It was simply the order of things. Grooming in ancient Egypt was not vanity, it was ritual. Both men and women of the elite class treated their appearance as a statement of status, health, and divine favor. Archaeological finds, including cosmetic chests recovered from tombs, reveal an astonishing array of tools and substances used each morning. Kohl, a dark mineral pigment, was carefully applied around the eyes. Historians believe this served both cosmetic and practical purposes, reducing glare from the intense Egyptian sun and offering some protection against insects and eye infection. The effect was striking, a sharp, dark outline that gave the face a focused, almost otherworldly quality. Wigs were essential for the elite. Wealthy Egyptians typically shaved their heads and wore elaborate hairpieces made from real human hair, styled and perfumed. Evidence from Deir el-Medina and other excavation sites shows that wig making was a sophisticated craft and that the quality of one's wig communicated social standing immediately. Perfumed oils, made from myrrh, cinnamon, and exotic imports from Punt, were rubbed into the skin to protect against the dry heat. Linen, the fabric of choice for all Egyptians of means, was so finely woven it was described by ancient writers as almost translucent, white, crisp, immaculate. But there's more to the story of Roman marriage that shaped these ceremonies and what came after. Who paid for all this? In both wealthy and humble families, the bride's family bore the costs. The major expense was the dowry, the does. For patrician families, this could mean estates, land, enslaved people, bags of gold coins. Marriage contracts detailed these transfers with precision worthy of business deals. For working families, the dowry was simpler but no less important. Household goods, a few coins, tools for the new household. Evidence suggests dowries could be paid in installments over 3 years, easing the burden on modest families. This dowry wasn't a gift to the bride. It went to the husband to cover household expenses, though legally it remained hers and would return to her family if the marriage ended. Where would the couple live? Always the husband's home. This is why the procession always moved from the bride's father's house to the groom's dwelling. Rich or poor, the pattern never changed. The bride left everything familiar, her home, her household gods, her daily routine. By the time the morning routine was complete, the wealthy Egyptian had been transformed, not into something artificial, but into what their society considered a perfected human form. Clean, anointed, adorned, ready to meet the world. Wealth in ancient Egypt was rarely idle. A noble's mourning, after grooming, moved quickly into obligation. Moving through Thebes was itself a display of power. The wealthy did not walk. The litter announced his arrival before he spoke a single word. Egypt was a civilization built on record-keeping, redistribution, and hierarchy. High officials managed grain supplies, temple operations, legal disputes, and the labor of hundreds of workers. Their estates functioned almost like small governments. Evidence from administrative papyri suggests that officials received daily reports from scribes. Workers arrived to receive rations. Tenants came to pay their dues in grain, linen, or livestock. Petitioners waited, sometimes in long lines, to bring disputes or requests before the man who held power over their district. The wealthy Egyptian did not simply consume resources. Historians believe they were expected to redistribute them, to support the temple, fund festivals, pay workers, and maintain loyalty among the people who served beneath them. This cycle of obligation and generosity was deeply embedded in Egyptian moral philosophy, captured in the concept of ma'at, the idea of cosmic order, truth, and balance. Meetings were held in open courtyards where the breeze moved through columns of painted stone. Scribes crouched nearby on reed mats, writing with brushes on papyrus sheets that curled at the edges in the dry heat. Decisions were made quietly, efficiently. A hand gesture, a nod, a word. Outside the compound walls, the sounds of Thebes carried on. Donkeys, market vendors, the distant chants from the temple complex at Karnak. Inside, the estate operated with a precision that suggested something almost modern. Power, in ancient Egypt, looked very much like administration. Before the midday meal, obligation called him to the temple. For the wealthy, religion and power were the same thing. Inside the temple, torchlight fell across painted stone as offerings were made and seen. To be seen giving was as important as the giving itself. By midday, the household turned its attention to food, and the table of a wealthy Egyptian was extraordinary. Archaeological evidence, including tomb paintings and organic remains found at elite burial sites, gives historians a detailed picture of what the rich consumed. The range was remarkable. Bread came in dozens of varieties, flavored with dates, honey, or anise. Roasted duck and goose were common. Fish from the Nile prepared with herbs and salt. Beef, which was expensive, appeared at elite tables in ways it rarely did elsewhere. Figs, pomegranates, grapes, and melons offered sweetness. Imported oils, spices, and wine, sometimes from as far as the Levant, marked a table as truly exceptional. Beer was the drink of all Egyptians, including the wealthy, but the elite also had access to wine of varied quality. Some estates maintained their own vineyards. Jars were labeled with the vintage year and origin, a practice not entirely unlike what wine enthusiasts might recognize today. Meals among the wealthy were rarely eaten alone. Guests were expected. Music accompanied the meal. Harps, flutes, and lutes played by professional musicians, some of whom were slaves trained specifically for the purpose. Dancers performed between courses. Evidence from banquet scenes painted on tomb walls shows guests seated on cushioned chairs, being served by attendants, with lotus blossoms held to their faces, the fragrance considered part of the pleasure of the meal itself. Eating well was not simply about nourishment, it was a performance of prosperity. Guests competed quietly, through stories of acquisitions, rare imports, and connections that others could only admire, offered to guests, witnessed by servants, and dedicated at least in part to the gods. The heat of the Egyptian afternoon demanded a slower pace. Elite estates were designed for it. Deep shade fell across interior courtyards where fish pools reflected the sky in cool, still rectangles. Gardens, meticulously maintained by groundskeepers, were filled with persea trees, sycamores, and flowering plants arranged in formal rows. Archaeological remains from royal and elite gardens suggest that these spaces were carefully engineered, with irrigation channels supplying water from the Nile through a network of clay pipes and channels. Wealthy Egyptians retreated here in the afternoon. Some rested on wooden beds draped with linen, others engaged in board games. Senet was popular, a game with movable pieces on a grid that carried spiritual significance. Hunting was an elite leisure activity. Estates sometimes included dedicated areas for bird hunting along the marshes at the river's edge. Fishing, too, was practiced for pleasure rather than necessity. Evidence suggests that literature had a place in elite households as well. Egypt produced poetry, wisdom texts, and stories that circulated among the educated class. A scribe might read aloud. Guests might share verses. These were moments of quiet cultivation, a reminder that Egyptian civilization valued the mind as much as the material. By late afternoon, as the heat began to ease and the light turned golden across the Nile's surface, the estate came alive again. Preparations for the evening were underway. The real gathering of the day was still to come. When the guests had gone and the servants had cleared, the estate fell quiet. The official walked alone to the garden. In the silence, the city of Thebes carried on beyond the walls, distant, endless, unchanged. His wealth did not come from one source. It never did, for men like him. Land was the foundation. The official controlled fields along the Nile, inherited, granted by the Pharaoh, accumulated over generations. The fields produced grain. The grain became wages, taxes, trade, the currency of a world without coins. He also held livestock. Cattle were counted like gold, recorded in official registers, taxed by the state. None of this required him to be present. Scribes managed every detail, recording, measuring, reporting back. His wealth also came from his office itself. His position gave him a share of everything that moved through it. His economic reach extended far beyond what he could see. Workshops, vineyards, fishing rights along the Nile, all generating income without his hand directly in them. Wealth in ancient Egypt was not gold sitting in a chest. It was grain in silos, cattle in pens, linen on looms, and the people who managed all of it for you. But land was only where it started. His government office paid him, not in coins because Egypt had no coins. Payment came in grain, linen, oil, and gold. And in land, always more land. He also collected taxes on behalf of the pharaoh. A portion of everything collected, grain, cattle, linen, stayed with him. Egypt's military campaigns flooded Thebes with wealth, gold from Nubia, slaves from the Levant, tribute from kingdoms that had no choice but to pay. Trade routes brought what Egypt could not grow: cedar from Lebanon, incense from Punt, copper from Sinai. The elite controlled access to all of it. Gold was the foundation of Egypt's power, and the official's position gave him a direct connection to its flow. Wealth in ancient Egypt flowed from every direction toward the men who held office, and never really stopped. The civilization that built these lives lasted for more than 3,000 years. That is not a statistic. It is almost incomprehensible. Kingdoms rose and fell, pharaohs came and went, and yet the rhythm of daily life along the Nile, the bread, the lemon, the coal around the eyes, the fish pool in the courtyard, persisted through century after century with remarkable continuity. What survives today are the tombs the wealthy left behind. The paintings on their walls were meant to preserve life, not just commemorate it. They show feasting, music, hunting, family. They show people who wanted to be remembered, not only for their power but for the pleasure they took in living. Historians continue to piece together what daily life truly felt like in ancient Egypt. Every excavation adds something new, but some things are already clear. The wealthy of ancient Egypt did not simply occupy the world. They adorned it. They organized it. They believed it was worth preserving for eternity. And in many ways, they were right.